Hello, welcome to MTG Specs. I am Lee, and today I'm going to take you on a speed run through my top 10 favourite commanders from the Lost Caverns of Ixalan. I hope you've had an amazing pre-release. I hope you've got out there and cracked some packs and you've pulled some amazing cards that you'd like to put into your decks, or maybe one of the 10 commanders that I have selected in no particular order as my top favourites. Here is number one. It is Davy Jones himself, Xavier, Infested Captain, a Sultai human fungus pirate who we can tap to remove a counter from another opponent we control to populate, or tap to sacrifice another creature to proliferate. We can only do either of those at sorcery speed, and my first thought was, let's go Super Friends, Sultai Super Friends, and we can use planeswalkers that can create token creatures, so we have the option to sacrifice those creatures to proliferate all of our planeswalkers, or we could remove a counter from one of our planeswalkers to create a copy of one of those creatures. I would be keen to speed Kiora the Crashing Wave through to that emblem where we create a 9/9 blue Kraken creature token and then have the opportunity to maybe keep copying them. That would be pretty good, but not as good as Xavier Sagas, which I'm thinking is a bit like Tom Bombadil with a fungus infection. Remember, you can remove counters from your sagas. If you remove a lore counter from a saga, the next time we go around and put a lore counter back on, it will trigger that chapter. So, for example, if we were on chapter 1 of Kiora Best of Sea God, we could create an 8 blue Kraken creature token with hexproof. Then we could use Xavier to remove a counter from that chapter. It will trigger again next turn. Remember, if you remove a counter from chapter 2 and it goes back to chapter 1, it doesn't trigger chapter 1. You're only triggering the chapters on a saga when you put lore counters on. And I would go with sagas where they create creatures, so you've still got that option to sacrifice the creatures and proliferate all our sagas just to speed them along to their last chapter. And because it's a tap ability with Xavier we would go for some blue and green spells that allow us to untap him. Look, Intruder Alarm, I broke Intruder Alarm. Amazing, I'm a genius. When creatures enter the battlefield, which is what our deck is all about, we get to untap Xavier. We could slap Aura of Dominion on him, tap one of those untapped creatures we've controlled to untap him, and then tap him again to do our proliferate shenanigans. And Seedborn Muse untaps all permanents you control during each player's untap step, so you can do all these things in other players' turns. And Displaced Dinosaurs is a pretty amazing card that's going in a lot of my decks. Would fit right at home here because sagas are historic permanents, so they're going to come into play as 7/7 dinosaurs. And because we're in blue, it'd be a shame not to copy those saga 7/7 dinosaurs. In a sense, if we are copying those sagas before they've reached chapter 3, they start at chapter 1 again, and so we get all these sagas ticking up at different times. I think this deck would be super fun to play. Lots of control over our sagas, or the planeswalkers, depending on which direction you go with it. And in my Tom Bombadil deck, there's a deck tech on my channel, there were lots of cards where we could remove counters just to back up what Xavier is doing, because can't always rely on a commander. So we've got Hex Parasite, Chisei Heart of Oceans, Thrall Parasite, all in the colours that we need, that remove a counter in some way so that we're able to trigger our sagas again. Xavier is definitely going into my Tom Bombadil deck. I can't wait to pick up a copy of him. Number 2 on my list is Amalia, Benavides, Aguirre. This card is insane. I'm just going to move myself over here. Literally insane. Just goldfishing this. The amount of ways you can gain life in a turn that trigger and explore every single time you gain life is insane. And she's getting loads of +1 counters. You are seeing most of your deck. You're getting all the lands that you could possibly need, which is strange in Orzhov. You're never going to be without land drops, which is pretty amazing. And then there's that bit about destroying all other creatures if its power is exactly 20. I don't think we even need to worry about that, although the tension it creates is fantastic as it's ticking up the whole time. You'll want to put all those amazing Orzhov cards in that can protect your commander, just so that as your enemies are scrambling to try and remove her, and she's ticking up, ticking up, ticking up. Love that. So that's a really nice dynamic to the game. We could pop Lurrus in as a companion or put it in the 99. Depends how you're going to build the deck. Obviously, if you're going to use Lurrus, all the permanent spells in your deck need to have converted mana cost 2 or less, which I think is worthwhile. Amalia can function with some very low casting cost creatures. For example, the Soul Sisters, which is the main way that we're going to be gaining life in this deck. So Soul's Attendant, Okinec Champion both say that when a creature enters the battlefield, you gain a life. Think about how many low-cost creatures you can cast in a turn, how many low-cost creatures you're going to be able to stack the top of your deck with because of the Explore trigger. She's going to be going off. She's going to be huge so quickly. I'm quite tempted by this commander, and I already have an Orzhov commander. Ooh, and then aristocrats. I mean, it screams aristocrats as well. We can have a carrion feeder in our deck, so we can sacrifice creatures. Then creatures like Market Gnome, Flesh Taker. Market Gnome says when it dies, you gain 1 life and draw a card. Gain a life. Trigger Amalia, amazing. And then a card like Flesh Taker, whenever you sacrifice another creature, you gain 1 life and scry 1. So, I mean, she's going to be going big really quickly. And then just return all those creatures to the battlefield and do it all again. And if there's one thing I've learned from a member of my playgroup, Louis, is that lots of small parts are incredibly difficult to interact with unless you have board wipes, and not everyone's packing board wipes all the time, so you can get away with quite a lot if people have got 1-for-1 removal. So we've got Patch Up, return up to 3 target creature cards with total mana value 3 or less from the graveyard to the battlefield. Ascend from Avernus, so you can pay into X and return lots and lots of those creatures. Proclamation of Rebirth, again, returning a creature, or returning up to 3 target creatures with converted mana cost 1 or less from your graveyard to play. And what we're going to do with all that life that we're going to be gaining, we can cast a card like Necrologia. Yeah, that's how you pronounce that. And as an additional cost to cast it, we can pay X life and draw a ton of cards. Although I have seen people kill themselves with this card. It's a lot of fun. And then, dare I say, Hatred, a card which I own, have never put in a deck because I'm not sure on that evil. But these days, get very competitive. Maybe I should be putting in Hatred. The problem is it just takes a player out real quick, and then they just sit there and watch the rest of you play. So I'm not sure I'm into that. But maybe you are. Like to cater to all sorts of people. And then we've got this pairing. So if we decide to fill the Amalia deck with power 1 or less creatures, then we can use this combination of Attrition and Charade. So you can sacrifice a creature with power 1 or less, using Attrition to destroy a target non-black creature, which will come straight back to your battlefield with Charade. You wouldn't be able to put this in the Lurrus deck, obviously, because Lurrus has got a cap on the converted mana cost of creatures that we can use. But this is a different idea. We saw this in action in our second MTG Spectacular gameplay episode. The gentleman in the bottom right, Toby, was playing Charade, and Attrition became a very difficult card to deal with in that game. You might like to check that out just to back up the idea of placing that into an Amalia deck. Pick number 3 is not rocket science. It's Ghalta Stampede Tyrant. It costs 8. It's 12/12. It's crowd pleasing. Everybody's excited to see Ghalta, and he brings all his friends with him as well because of his ETB, where we can put any number of creature cards from our hand onto the battlefield. And who are those friends going to be? Well, let's sculpt our hand with Worldly Tutor, Tooth and Nail, and Fierce Empath. And I think what would set this deck list apart from other deck lists will be oops, all ETBs. So every card has an ETB. At our lower end, we've got Wood Elves, which is finding us a forest card to ramp us. Eternal Witness is allowing us to return a card from our graveyard to our hand, hopefully a creature card. Maybe we could put something like Mulch into our deck so that we can be putting some creatures into the graveyard and returning to our hand. Then they'll be in our hand when Ghalta comes into play, and then they'll be able to join him, having a big stompy party. And Acidic Slime coming into play to destroy target artifact, enchantment, or a land. Can you imagine destroying a land in 2023? Outrageous. Then at our top end, we've got Apex, Altisaur, Foe, Razor, Regent, both come into play and fight creatures. So as long as we've packed our deck with Concordant Crossroads and Crashing Drawbridge, everything will have haste. So we'll be able to clear the way with the fight mechanic and then just crash in and win the game. I would imagine it's an 8 casting cost commander. If you're casting something for 8, you probably should be winning the game. And Titan of Industry is there We've got loads of options with him. Destroying artifacts, enchantments, gaining 5 life. 4/4 green Rhino Warrior. Creature tokens. Put shield counters on creature control. Choose 2 of those. Go absolutely nuts. And if we're doing ETBs, we will want to use things like Conjurer Closet, Panharmonicon, and Sword of Hearth and Home, either to trigger Ghalta again, because we're in green. We're probably using cards like Garruk's Uprising, and when those creatures are hitting the battlefield that are power 4 or more, we're drawing more cards. Let's get Ghalta back onto the battlefield after a bounce so that we can put those cards onto the battlefield as well, or we can just use it to re-trigger one of our ETBs. This is my favourite part of this deck. Excuse me, overexcitement. When Ghalta comes into play and that ETB trigger is on the stack, cast Return of the Wild Speaker, who says, draw cards equal to the greatest power among non-human creatures you control. I would assume that's our 12/12 commander. Let's draw 12 more cards and then put all the creatures we've drawn onto the battlefield. That is insane. That is game ending. Oh, and this is cool as well. I don't know if you know this interaction with Ghalta, but you can bounce him in response to his own ETB and then replay him again as one of the creatures you can put from your hand onto the battlefield, re-triggering him. So Erratic Portal, pay 1, return Ghalta to your hand whilst his trigger is on the stack, and then when his trigger goes off, put him back again, and then he might again trigger something like Garruk's Uprising, and hey presto, another card in hand, potentially another creature on the battlefield. Oh, and here we go. Garruk's Uprising and moving me over here. It's the first time I've been in the corner of the screen. It's very exciting. It's like I'm a real YouTuber now. Garruk's Uprising, Garden Project, just drawing cards. So we've got even more creatures in our hand. Number 4 on the list is Inti, Seneschal of the Sun. Quite a lot of text, not as simple as Ghalta. Whenever you attack, you may discard a card. When you do, put a +1/+1 counter on target attacking creature. It gains trample until end of turn. Whenever you discard 1 or more cards, exile the top card of your library. You may play that card until your next end step. Really into this commander. So I'm going to shrink myself a little bit because I am covering that text. Here we go. The first thing we'll want to do is have evasive creatures in our deck, because you'll notice that Inti himself doesn't have to attack. So it could be something with Menace like Bothersome Quasit, who I would include in the deck list because we're going to be casting quite a lot of non-creature spells, and that means we'll be able to go to creatures. And then Bloodfeather Phoenix has flying. I think flying with those +1/+1 counters would be pretty major in this deck. So we've got our evasive creatures in place, and then we want to lean into the discard. So again, not relying just on our commander, cards like Jaxis the Troublemaker or Avaricious, that's a good word, word of the day, Avaricious Dragon, are able to dump our hand into our graveyard. Other ways to get cards into our graveyard, we've got Shattered Perception, a wheel effect there, discard all the cards in your hand, then draw that many cards, which we can flash back. Or cards like Seize the Spoil, where we're just discarding 1 card for some kind of benefit. And then cards like Currency Converter, which vibe with cards being discarded. This one says whenever you discard a card, you may exile that card from your graveyard, pay 2 to draw a card and discard a card. And then you can put cards exiled with Currency Converter into your graveyard to create treasure tokens if they're lands, or if they're non-land cards, create 2/2 black rogue creature tokens. And the reason I want to get all those cards into the graveyard is because between red and some artifacts, we've got some really sweet ways to use the cards in our graveyard. Felden of the Third Path, the classic, where we can tap in, pay 2 in a red to create a token that's a copy of target creature card in our graveyard to give it haste. That's pretty cool, especially if we're able to drop something quite big early on. Again, who needs black? We can use red for this. Containment Construct, whenever you discard a card, you may exile that card from your graveyard. If you do, you may play that card this turn, kind of madness-esque quality there. And then Duretti again. I'm going to use the word classic again. All these classic examples of ways that red can use cards in the graveyard. We can do his -2 to sacrifice an artifact. If we do, return target artifact card from our graveyard to the battlefield. So there are lots of different ways to build this. You can go down an artifact route, creatures route. You could do non-creature spells, because we can use cards like Past in Flames, Backdraft Hellkite and Underworld Breach, which allow us to use instants and sorceries again. In fact, Underworld Breach is giving the escape cost to all of our non-land cards in our graveyard. So Inti is attacking, discarding cards, then we can use those cards for benefits later on. And then there was a couple of cards I just wanted to show from the Doctor Who set. I'm going to get even smaller in the corner. Hello. So Flaming Tyrannosaurus. Whenever we cast a spell from anywhere other than our hand, Flaming Tyrannosaurus deals 3 damage to any target. Then we put a +1/+1 counter on Flaming Tyrannosaurus. I'm only putting this in because recently I had to face this in a Doctor Who themed evening, and it was an absolute monster. And Inti allows us to cast cards from exile, so why not take advantage of that? We're doing that with Memory Worm as well. Whenever you cast a spell from anywhere other than your hand, Memory Worm deals 2 damage to target player. That player discards a card, then draws a card, and we get to put a +1/+1 counter on Memory Worm. So there are lots of routes to building this very interesting mono red commander. I'm quite excited by him, which doesn't happen with mono red commanders very often. Talking of escape, Ox of Agarnus. When Ox of Agarnus enters the battlefield, we can discard our hand and draw 3 cards, which is awesome because we like discarding cards in this deck. And it's got an escape of 2 and exiling 8 other cards from our graveyard to have him escape with a +1/+1 counter on him. Number 5, and at the halfway point, is Sovereign Okinec Ahau, who I've already done a deck tech for on my channel. The text reads that when he attacks, for each creature you control with power greater than that creature's base power, put a number of +1/+1 counters on that creature equal to the difference, which basically means if he attacks, it triggers, and then you look at any creature that's got some kind of buff to its power, and you put +1/+1 counters on it equal to the difference. That can be anthems, that can be overrun effects, that can be counters. And once the counters are on, it becomes exponential. Already covered it on my channel. One attack and it's all over. That's not an exaggeration. It really can be. But on my channel, when I covered it, I did Hydras and 0/0 Typal, or 0/0 Kindred, or whatever we're saying at the moment. But that wasn't the best way of building it. That was the most creative and fun way of building it, which is kind of my vibe on my channel. The best way to do it is using hate bears. Wow, won't you be popular? So, Selesnya has loads of awesome cards that just screw up other people's plans. Drannith Magistrate doesn't let people cast their commanders. What fun. Archon of Emeria. Each player can't cast more than 1 spell each turn. Non-basic lands your opponents control enter the battlefield tapped. I didn't create these cards. Wizards created them. Don't blame me. Even Mind Sensor. If an opponent was searched their library, they search the top 4 cards of their library instead. So we put all these in first alongside some mana dorks, like Delighted Halfling, and some cool utility creatures. Eternal Witness is back to return a card from the graveyard to our hand. Toski's here to draw us lots of cards. Like 3, 4 and below converted mana cost things. And then we start using our anthems. So Glorious Anthem, +1/+1, Gaia's Anthem, +1/+1, Collective Blessing, +3/+3, when Okinec attacks. All of those horrible cards we cast at the start to ramp into Okinec and to stop our opponents from doing all the glorious things they want to do are going to get buffed by the anthems and buffed by Sovereign Okinec as well. That's going to get out of hand really quickly, and they're not really going to be able to do much about it, really. Sorry, but that's the way it is. And then you want to protect Sovereign. Runetail from Kamigawa, original Kamigawa, best set ever, fight me in the comments, says we can prevent all damage that would be dealt to creature you control if you can flip it, and you can flip it if you've got more than 30 life, and we have that in Commander. Shalai, Voice of Plenty, we can put +1/+1 counters on our creatures, which will be a buff, which Sovereign Okinec will see, and also Planeswalkers and creatures we control have hexproof, including our Commander, because people are going to want to kill the Commander, so you need to protect him. An amazing deck. It is going to win games. It's going to win them really quickly. And Dolan Gate, well, we want to attack with Sovereign, so let's attack with Sovereign and know that he can't be dealt any combat damage. Number 6 out of my top 10 is this absolute monster, Ojer, Axonil, Deepest Might. My word. So it's a 4/4 trample, which says if a red source you control would deal an amount of non-combat damage less than Ojer Axonil's power to an opponent, that source deals damage equal to Ojer Axonil's power instead. So if we fill this deck full of things that deal 1 damage to our opponents, it's not going to deal 1 damage, it's going to deal 4 damage. And unfortunately, or fortunately for us, there are lots of ways of dealing 1 damage when opponents are just playing the game. I feel like I'm a monster for suggesting these things, but here we go. It's up to you if you decide to follow this advice or completely ignore me. You're the monster. I'm just enabling you. Ether Sting. Whenever one of your opponents plays a creature spell, Ether Sting deals 1 damage to that player, except it would be 4 damage if we had our commander out. Battle Strain. Whenever a creature blocks, you're going to deal 1 damage to that creature's controller. So do we block to defend ourselves? Do we take 4 damage? Mana Barbs. Whenever a player taps a land for mana, Mana Barbs deals 1 damage to that player. It would be 4 damage. I hear you have to tap quite a lot of lands in Commander. That kind of shuts the game down completely. Oh, someone should stop me. Someone should burn this video immediately. And then there's lots of other ways to deal 1 damage. So Firebrand Archer, whenever you cast a non-creature spell, it's the same as Kessig Flame Breather. It deals 1 damage to each opponent. So you'd be dealing about 12 damage across the opponents. And whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control with impact tremors, deal 1 damage to each opponent. All non-combat damage, all dealing more damage than it should. Remember, this is all based on the power of our commander. So let's fill it with pingers as well. Prodigal Pyromancer, Volshock Sorcerer, Cunning Spark Mage. All cards we can tap to deal 1 damage. Would be 4. And then, oh, I do like this little combo. So, put Magebane Armor onto our commander to give it +2/+4, and it loses flying. It didn't have flying in the first place. Prevent all non-combat damage that would be dealt to that equipped creature. With Pyrohemia, if there's no creatures on the battlefield at the beginning of our end step, we're going to sacrifice the enchantment. But because of the Magebane Armor, whenever we trigger Pyrohemia, tapping red and dealing 1 damage to each creature and each player, it is going to deal 4 damage. It will wipe out all creatures, probably all players, and Ojer will be sitting there looking pretty. Obviously, our life total has to be higher than everybody else's, or we're going to take ourselves out as well. But that's pretty mean, pretty cool. Again, someone should stop me. And then Wildfire Elemental. I really like this idea that if we increase Ojer's power, we're going to increase the amount of damage that we do. It actually gets worse. It gets worse. So whenever an opponent is dealt non-combat damage, creatures you control get +1/+0 until end of turn, which includes our commander. And if we're dealing tap, deal 1 damage, really 4, then we're going to put +1 onto our commander. The next time we tap, we're actually going to deal 5 damage. And so on and so forth. And then there's the equipment option as well. We can pop equipment onto our commander to make him even bigger, to deal even more damage. What is this commander? This is insane. Horrible mono red commander. Cannot wait to play it. Next up, number 7 is my favourite new dinosaur, Pantlaza Sun Favoured. It costs 5 for a 4/4. When it enters or another dinosaur enters the battlefield under your control, you may discover X, where X is the creature's toughness. We can only do this once each turn, but they put white in the casting cost, which means we have access to blink effects, which means we can do it more than once per turn, because if we blink Pantlaza, then it creates a completely new copy of Pantlaza, which means that do this only once each turn can be negated. Also note, not a cast trigger, it's just an enters the battlefield trigger. Also note, it's not non-token, so we can have a lot of fun with this very powerful commander. Firstly, we want dinosaurs with high toughness, like Temple Altasaur, Runic Armasaur, or Ranging Raptors, especially loving the 2/5 there on Runic Armasaur, only costing 3. That would be Discover 5, pretty good. Then we can have some cards with ETB, so when they come into play off Discover, or if we bounce them, we can trigger that again. Trumpeting Carnosaur, when Trumpeting Carnosaur enters the battlefield, it discovers 5. Raging Sawtooth deals 1 damage to each other creature when it comes into play. Polyraptor, love in this deck, because if we can deal damage to it quite consistently, say maybe with a Raging Sawtooth, we can create a token that's a copy of Polyraptor. This is a 5/5, which means when the tokens come into play, because it doesn't say non-token on our commander, we can be triggering Discover 5. How are we going to be blinking our commander or any of our ETB dinosaurs? Eldrazi Displacer, just for 2. Colourless, exile another target creature, then return it to the battlefield, tapped under its owner's control. Emil the Blessed, I don't know if unicorns and dinosaurs work together. They are going to in this deck. We can do the same exile creature and return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. Sword of Hearth and Home, slap it onto the dinosaur, deal with combat damage, exile another creature. We saw that in Ghalta as well. And then we've got lots of spellways. Lots of instants here that we can use to bounce our creatures. Semester's End, creature will come into play with a +1/+1 counter on it. Eerie Interlude, Mass Blink, Ephemerate, Targeted Blink with Rebound on it too. And then things like Nahiri's Resolve. At the beginning of your end step, exile any number of non-token artifacts and all creatures we control. Return those creatures to the battlefield under their control at the beginning of your next upkeep, which is a completely different turn. And if we're going to be having creatures, especially dinosaurs, bouncing in and out, we can put cards in like Warmstorm Surge. So whenever a creature enters the battlefield under our control, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. Or Preston the Vanisher. Whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, if it wasn't cast, we create illusions. Have 5 of those illusions, we can exile. Target non-land permanents. Rabbits, unicorns, and dinosaurs working together just fills me with harmony and hope. At number 8 is Anim, Pakal, Thousandth Moon, a 1/2 for 3, a human soldier. Whenever you attack with one or more non-gnome creatures, Anim is a non-gnome creature, put a +1/+1 counter on Anim Pakal, then create X 1/1 colourless gnome artifact creature tokens that are tapped and attacking, where X is the number of +1/+1 counters on Anim Pakal. So you don't have to attack with your commander here, any other non-gnome creature will do. And the reason I really like this card is because, not because it's creating gnomes, although gnomes are lovely, I have nothing against gnomes, is that we're creating artifacts. So the first thing I want to do is put a load of +1/+1 counters onto Anim Pakal, and I'm going to do that with Cafar's Crusade. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield under our control, we put a +1/+1 counter on each creature we control, including our commander. That means gnomes coming into play, put +1/+1 counters onto our commander, and then a non-gnome creature attacks. That's even more gnomes. Let's have even more gnomes with Ojer, Deepest Foundation, which will create triple the amount of gnomes, and then double the amount of gnomes with Mondrak. I've said the word gnomes too much. The word has lost all meaning. If those artifact gnomes come into play, cards like Reckless Fireweaver, Hedron, Detonator, and Ingenious Artillerist are going to deal a ton of damage to them, and even the Hedron can sacrifice some of those gnomes for a little bit of card advantage. Want to put more +1/+1 counters onto your commander? Of course you do. So here we have Sen's Tactician, Luminarch Aspirant, and Rosie Cotton of South Lane. The Tactician can tap for 1 white to put a +1 counter onto a soldier creature, which Anim is. Luminarch Aspirant does this at the beginning of combat anyhow as a trigger. Rosie Cotton keeps delivering from the Lord of the Rings set. Whenever we create a token, we create a lot of tokens in this deck. We put a +1/+1 counter on target creature other than Rosie. Put them on your commander, create more gnomes. Pretty cool stuff. And then we can have extra combats to create even more gnomes. Karlach, Fury of Avernus. Whenever you attack, if it's the first combat phase of the turn, we untap all attacking creatures, including non-gnomes. Oh look, Karlach is a non-gnome, triggering Anim again. And then we've got the classic Infinite Combats combo with Phyrexian Altar and Aggravated Assault. If we're up to 5 gnomes, we can sacrifice those 5 gnomes to pay for the activated ability on the enchantment, and we can do that over and over again and have as many combat steps as we would like. And then Devilish Valet. Just thought I'd finish with this chap, who is a non-gnome. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under our control, we double his power until end of turn. Devilish Valet can get pretty big in this deck. Number 9 is Tetzin Gnome Champion. I completed the video for this today. Well, at least I filmed it. I've got to edit it, but it's coming out on Tuesday. So if you want a deep dive into Tetzin and you would like a deck list, then you should hit subscribe. In fact, if you've enjoyed this video, you should hit subscribe, and I'll give you a moment to do that. Thanks. You're very kind. Okay, deep breath. Let's read all of this text. Whenever Tetzin or another double-faced artifact enters the battlefield under your control, mill 3 cards. You may put an artifact card from among them into your hand. And then you can craft with 6 artifacts by paying 4, exile Tetzin, and exile 6 artifacts from other permanents you control or cards from your graveyard, and it transforms into the Golden Gear Colossus, which has Vigilance and Trample and is 6/6. Whenever that enters the battlefield or attacks, we can transform up to 1 other target double-faced artifact we control and create 2 1/1 colourless gnome artifact creature tokens. God, deep breath. Lovely. The trap with Tetzin, the Tetzin trap as I call it, is just jamming every double-faced artifact card into your deck because they are not synergistic, they have nothing in common, therefore you're going to have this deck list which is not cohesive at all. There's not going to be a cohesive strategy. So we lean into artifacts and then we pick out the big bombs. The best part is it's in the colours of cards that really like artifacts in the graveyard. Emery, Ojer, Goblin Welder, they love doing things with artifacts in the graveyard. And then the bombs that I'm talking about are double-faced artifacts, which are pretty amazing, but have these incredibly prohibitive transform criteria. Azor's Gateway wants you to pay 1, tap it, draw a card, then exile a card from your hand. And then if cards with 5 or more different converted mana costs are exiled with Azor's Gateway, you gain 5 life. That's insane. That takes forever. It has no protection. It doesn't have ward on it. Obviously, ward on artifacts and enchantments is quite a new thing. That would have benefited from it because you're just going to have a load of exile cards. So what better way to use the Golden Gear Colossus than to transform Azor's Gateway into Sanctum of the Sun, which is insane, adding X mana of any one colour to our mana pool where X is our life total. We could do a lot with 40 mana. We could maybe use as a Lord High Artificer's activated ability for 5, where we shuffle our library, exile the top card, and play that card without paying its mana cost. We could do that 8 times. That would be pretty cool. And in the deck tech, I will show you a way, as long as we've got a high life total, of killing all the other opponents straight away if we've got access to Sanctum of the Sun and a mystery spell, which you'll find out when you watch that video on Tuesday, I'm sure. Brass's Tunnel Grinder, amazing card, comes into play, discard any number of cards, and then draw that many cards plus 1. If we descend during a turn, at the end of that turn, we get to put a boar counter onto it. I like the flavour of it taking time. But we don't want to wait. We want to use our Golden Gear Colossus to transform that straight away into Tetzin, the Searing Rift. And that is a legendary land that can add red, and whenever we cast a permanent spell using mana from that land, we get to discover X, where X is that spell's mana value. We're going to lean in on artifacts coming into play, casting artifact spells and creating tokens to create a token army with cards like Efficient Construction, Saheeli Sublime Artificer and Saheeli the Gifted. And also we're going to lean into Incubate because Incubate tokens are double-faced artifacts. Elish Norn creates 5 of them on the back. Corruption of Tawashi creates an Incubate 4 token, but also loves it when we're transforming. We get to draw cards, but only once per turn. And Chrome Host Sea Shark is creating loads of Incubate tokens whenever we cast non-creature spells, which is the backbone of this Tetzin deck. And I have completely gone ahead, or gone against, all of the fantastic removal we have in red, white and blue in Jeskai. So no Blasphemous Acts, no Path to Exile, no Swords to Plowshares. It's all artifact-based ways of stopping people attacking us, like Crawl Space and Ensnaring Bridge. And then we're going to build a token army with Urza, Prince of Krug, Illustrious Wanderglyph, Cyberdrive, Awakener. So Urza's going to give all our artifact creatures +2/+2, and Illustrious Wanderglyph's going to give them +2/+2 if we have the City's Blessing. And then the famous finisher, Cyberdrive Awakener, is going to make all our artifacts into 4/4s and smash in for the win, especially as it gives them flying. My 10th commander in my top 10 list is the best pirate I have seen out of the illustrious history of pirates in Magic the Gathering, which is Don Andres the Renegade, a Grixis 4/3 vampire pirate. Each creature you control but don't own gets +2/+2, has Menace and Death Touch, and is a pirate in addition to its other types. Whenever you cast a non-creature spell you don't own, create 2 tapped treasure tokens. He is perfect. So he is obviously a theft commander, and he's giving me Bald Lightning vibes. So we just go back to him. If you use the usual kind of theft spells, the red theft spells, which are temporary, we're taking a creature off an opponent, it's getting bigger, it's getting evasion, and then it's going to just roll straight back into those opponents, and then they're going to get it back at the end of the turn. So it really reminds me of Ball Lightning, where you're casting something huge. A Ball Lightning is a 6/1, with trample that you send at your opponents and then it's gone. So I've got that, get that feeling from it. We can use loads of mutinous spells like Mass Mutiny. For each opponent, gain control of up to one target creature that player controls until end of turn. Untap those creatures. They gain haste until the end of the turn. I am so in love with this Vampire Pirate. He is amazing. Let's move me over here. There we go. Excellent. It immediately reminded me of a Dock 2 card, the Beast Deathless Prince. So when you cast that spell, you gain control of target creature until end of turn, untap it, and it gains menace and haste until end of turn. So it's giving it evasion, just like Don Andres does as well. And then the Beast enters the battlefield tapped with 6 stun counters on it. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to its owner, so it works really well with this Vampire Pirate, we can untap this Beast and draw a card. Insurrection, I mean, with Don Andres is perfect. A bit win more, I think, because usually untapping all creatures, gain control of them and giving them haste, you've won the game anyway. But let's just make doubly sure. Let's give them +2/+2. Let's give them menace. Let's give them haste as well. Works really well with Marchesa the Black Rose. A deck I'm thinking about putting back together. Don Andres makes me want to do that. So the deal with Marchesa is other creatures you control have Dethrone, which means when they're attacking a player with the most life or tie for the most life, you can put a +1/+1 counter on them. And then whenever a creature you control with a +1/+1 counter and it dies, it returns to you at the beginning of the next end step. If you've got a way to sacrifice it, like with Carrion Feeder, technically you are controlling your opponent's creature, so when it dies it will come back under your control. Pretty sneaky, pretty horrible way of building Marchesa, but works so well with this pirate. It makes me want to get the old band back together. Can't wait. And then, of course, he says we're making treasure tokens when we're casting spells that we don't own as well. So cards like Plague and Nasari, Grimmer, Saruman's Footman, Stolen Strategy are all spells we're using so that we can cast instants and sorceries and spells that belong to our opponents. But we control them, so we get to create 2 treasure tokens. And then if we're creating treasure tokens, we might as well do the Prosper thing. I nearly went a whole video of that saying Prosper. Marionette Master. Does anyone ever choose to put the 3/1/1 colourless servo artifact creature tokens into play? I don't think they do. I think we always put the +1/+1 counters on Marionette Master so that whenever we sacrifice a treasure, for example, it'll deal 4 damage or have an opponent lose life equal to Marionette Master's power, which is usually 4. Reverend Riches, potential win here. I've never managed to put it off myself, but it's a pretty cool thing to shoot for, and it goes really well with this Vampire Pirate. And maybe just to fuel an amazing Crackle with power. I have died to a Crackle with power before. Pretty cool. And then instead of just exiling or looking at the top of libraries, we can just go for a deep dive into their libraries with Bribery. So search target opponent's library for a creature card and put that into play under your control. There's no ephemeral quality to it then. You just control it. You don't own it. You'll have +2/+2, Menace and Death Touch until they can remove it. Praetor's Grasp. Similar thing, search target opponent's library for a card and exile it face down. Then that player shuffles his or her library. You may look at it and play that card for as long as it remains exiled. Creature, spell, entirely up to you. It's a pirate's prerogative. And then the final thought I had about this deck was board wipe everybody. Maybe you're in a meta that doesn't have a lot of board wipes. Board wipe everybody and bring back those creatures from graveyards under your control. You don't own them, but you control them. No one else has got any creatures. You've got all the menacey, death touchy, +2/+2 creatures. I think you're probably going to win. And with thrilling encore, if Don Andres should go to the graveyard, you can bring him back. Well, that was my top 10 commanders from the Lost Caverns of Ixalan. I had so much fun putting this video together, and if you enjoyed this humble free content, if it's inspired you or entertained you, then a like and subscribe would mean the world to me. I will be back this week with my Tetzin deck list. If you're interested in Sovereign Okinec, check out the deck tech, which is already on my channel. And if you're interested in some gameplay that focuses very much on laughter and table talk, we've got 2 of those already there waiting for you. Entertainment, free entertainment that you could be enjoying and liking and subscribing to. Really enjoyed putting this video together. Hope to see you soon, and until next time, I've been Lee and this has been MTG Specs.